I am very grateful to be with all of you today at the Arlington Yoga Studio. My special gratitude to Marinda. Thank you for blessing me with this opportunity to assist you in your wonderful work here. It's not exactly work, it's your wonderful offerings of love to all these people and to the world. Thank you. I was asked to speak something about spiritual life. It's quite a broad topic, but we have to begin somewhere. We see in the world today so many problems. At the Gulf of Mexico, not too far from here, recently, there was perhaps one of the greatest man-made ecological disasters in our history, where oil was uncontrollably spewing into the world's water system, and what the effects will be for the future will be seen. The the British Petroleum Oil Company explained their frustration initially in trying to solve the problem because it was 1 mile down below the surface of the sea. But actually the problem was much deeper than 1 mile. Great thinkers have always said that the external problems in this world so often are rooted in the problems within the human heart. If you have boils on your body, to relieve the pain and try to, drain the infections is very important. But if the cause of that problem is a disease in the blood, unless we address the root cause, then however many superficial problems we solve, another one will come, and another one, and another one. And in this case, the ecological, environmental pollution is rooted in pollution of the human heart. There's a hole in the yoga system. That hole is called avidya, or ignorance. And from that hole is spewing the toxic oil of greed, egotism, selfishness, arrogance. And that is what so often induces people trying to gain for themselves, individually and collectively, without understanding the sacredness of our relationship with other living beings and with nature. Yoga can be translated in various ways. In Sanskrit, yoga means union. It also means harmony. That the body, the mind, live in harmony with our true self, our Atma. The Gita calls it the Atma, or the living force. That is who we really are. Unless we understand who we really are, we cannot really understand our true self-interest. What really will make me happy? Unless we know who we really are, we can't understand our relationship on a deep level with other living beings or with nature. Yoga teaches us how to harmonize our body, mind, and soul in such a way that we understand our relationship with all other living beings. This is the first teaching of the Gita. And it's a universal teaching. In the Bible, it is said by Lord Jesus, "What is the use if you gain the whole world if you lose your eternal soul?" And the Bhagavad Gita explains the nature of that soul. Na jayate mriyate va kadachit nayam bhutva bhavita vanabhuya. That the soul is by nature eternal, not subject to either birth or death. And the soul is sat chit, it's full of knowledge and ananda. Its own inherent quality is to be in ecstasy. And what is that ecstasy? Something we all have in common. The Brahma Sutra says, Ananda Mayo Bhyashat. Everyone is looking for pleasure. Do you have rats here in Texas? Okay, well, when a rat comes into your house, he's looking for the same thing in your house that you're looking for in your house. He's looking for pleasure. He's looking for food, just like we eat. He's looking for entertainment. If it's a he, he's looking for a she rat, and they have their little families in your basement. Whether you're a king, or whether you're a farmer, or whether you're from Palestine, whether you're a Palestinian or a Hebrew Israeli, everyone's looking for pleasure. It's a universal principle. The birds, the lizards. But what is real pleasure? I remember when I met Mother Teresa in the slums of Calcutta, she told me the real problem in this world is hunger. She said, I'm feeding so many people food every day, but that's not the problem. It's not hunger of the stomach. It's hunger of the heart. People are looking for love. And it is God's love that can fill the hunger of the heart. Just think, if you were to, Jai Maharaji, very exalted personality has just come in, Bhakti Sundar Goswami Maharaj. You have very nicely interrupted. Thank you. If you were the proprietor of everything that existed in this whole planet Earth, but you were the only person alive, would you be happy? We want loving relationships. If a little bird came by and landed on your finger, that bird would be more important to you than everything you own. Because you can relate, because the bird's alive. And we see a little child. I've seen it so many times, where parents are so busy, they don't have time for their children. And they may be giving children all kinds of toys and all kinds of games and all kinds of television, and they may dress their little daughter in very, very beautiful clothes so she looks so pretty. But inside, she's miserable. Because really what she wants is to be loved. And for someone that she can really give her love to. To give love and to receive love is the fundamental basic principle of happiness for the heart. Things can give some pleasure to the senses and to the mind, but things cannot give pleasure to the heart. Love gives pleasure to the heart. And the origin of that experience is the living force, the spiritual nature of who we really are, our inherent love for God. This is a universal principle. And when we understand our own, when the body and the mind is in harmony, in relationship with our true self, and with God within us, then we can perceive the spiritual relationship with every living being. When we talk about universal brotherhood or sisterhood, there has to be a foundational basis for that to be real. On the physical, mental, and emotional levels, we have so many differences. But on the spiritual level, there is a oneness. There is a true relationship. Because we see each other as spiritual parts of our beloved. There's a beautiful verse in Bhagavad Gita. Vidyavanaya sampane brahmani gabihastini suni chaiva swapakecha pandita samadarshana. This is the Vedic scriptures' definition of knowledge or wisdom. Not how much data you have accumulated in your brain, but real knowledge is to see every living being with equal vision. To be compassionate and to have love for the sacredness of life. The life in a tree. The life in another living being, whatever particular nationality or race or religion they may be, or whatever species. Whether one is a priest, or a farmer, or an elephant, or a cow, or a dog, or a cat. When we see our relationship, there's compassion, there's sympathy, there's love. I see people love their dogs and cats as family members. I remember that was the case when I grew up. We had a little dog named Kippy. He was a German Schnauzer. And he was kind of small and really very enthusiastic. He used to bark whoever came to the door. Ruff, 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 ruff. And I remember when my father's best friend came to the door and Kippy was going ruff, 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 ruff. And he didn't want to come in, and my father said, "Don't come in, don't worry, Kippy doesn't bite." So he came in and ruff, he bit him. And my father's friend said, "I thought he doesn't bite, he just bit me." My father said, "I don't understand, he never bit anyone before." It took me years to find out that it must have been that person's karma. But anyways, he was a family member. Because there was a relationship. Now people eat cows because they don't feel a relationship with them. But the cows have the mother cow and the calf cow has such a beautiful, loving relationship, very similar to a human and her own child. I used to take care of cows. I used to brush them and milk them, and with a little stick, I'd take them out to the pasture to eat. And they were life-loving creatures, and because I had a relationship, I loved them and I felt for them. So on a spiritual platform, we can actually understand our relationship with others, and we feel real compassion, real sympathy, and real love. Otherwise, our love is focused only on those who we may have an immediate physical and emotional relationship with. And that can very much change, too, according to how people relate to us. But real love satisfies the heart. Ahoitaki apratihata. To the degree it is unconditional, unselfish, and unmotivated. That is love. Like a mother's love for a child. It's totally unselfish, a good mother. I remember when I was a child, I would say, "Mother, give me this," and she would run and give it. "Mother, do this," and we expect things, and we never gave anything in return. What to speak of a baby? The mother's up all night. One lady last night was saying her child had a certain type of disorder for about 8 months, where all night long would scream. And the mother would be up, just trying to swing the child, and trying to anything to give pacification to the child. And what did the child give the mother? Did the child even appreciate it? But if it wasn't for that kind of love, probably every one of us would have been dead as babies. Yes? It's the love of a mother that is the reason why we're alive. Or a love of a father. And that love is very unselfish, and therefore deeply affects the heart. So when love is unselfish, without ego, it actually gives deep satisfaction. And this is the greatest need. In the absence of that, we try to find that satisfaction that the soul and the heart is crying for and longing for. We're trying to find it in superficial relationships and in accumulation of things, property, fame, prestige, skills, which are all nice, but they only give satisfaction to the heart when those things and those skills and the fame or whatever we get in this world, we harmonize with our relationship with our own soul and with God and with other living beings. Avidya or ignorance means forgetfulness of who we really are, and forgetfulness of our relationships with God and with others. And from that ignorance, that search for pleasure starts going in the wrong way. And there's the false ego, the ahankar. What is the ego? It's simply something we carry around with us, which is the misconception that we're separate from our own soul. We're separate from God. And we have this separation from others. That's the ego, just forgetfulness of our relationships, forgetfulness of our identity, separation. And from that comes greed and arrogance and selfishness. Inner satisfaction is the solution to the problem. And that is the purpose of yoga. To actually find that inner satisfaction that is unending. That is who we really are. And that's also the purpose of religion. The word religion comes from the Latin word religio, which means to bind back to our true essence. And a saintly person in Sanskrit is called saragrahi, one who is always seeking the essence of a situation. So the beginning of our spiritual path really is to be inspired to the importance of this. Bhakti yoga is the yoga that especially focuses on awakening that prema, or unselfish spiritual love that is dormant within us. Just the other day, I was on a radio interview with one lady, and she said that years ago she began practicing yoga. And when she heard of Bhakti Yoga, she was really turned off by the concept. It just sounded too spiritual and religious for her. She was doing yoga because she wanted to be beautiful, vivacious, and healthy. And so she started doing asanas. And gradually, as she did asanas and pranayam, breath control and different types of postures, years and years went by, and she told me, she not only told me, she told all her listeners on the radio. She said that through Hatha Yoga, she started getting a peace of mind that she never had before. And in that peace of mind, she naturally became more and more inclined towards something very deep and spiritual. Although her initial purpose was for health and for beauty and flexibility, she got all that. But it opened her mind and opened her heart for deeper spiritual experiences beyond the temporary physical experiences that yoga gives us. And she said, gradually, I developed a very deep interest in bhakti, the yoga of the heart, the yoga of love, the yoga of connecting to the divine, and to gyan, understanding these different principles. It's the search of the human heart. My beloved Gurudev, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, he would say that real spirituality is not about being a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or a Jain or a Buddhist or a Sikh or a Zoroastrian or a Sufi. It's about connecting to our essence and awakening love of God. And when as that love is awakened, natural compassion and love for every living being, who are all our neighbors, is awakened. That's the first and great commandment of the Bible. It's the ultimate goal of every religion. Krishna tells in Gita, Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam praja. Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma suja. Which essentially means that the particular ritual and form is only as important as it brings us to this goal of surrendering our heart with love to the Lord and receiving that love. When we clean the ecology of the heart, naturally, we respect and we honor every living being, whoever they may be, and we respect nature because there's inner fulfillment. To give that fulfillment is the need in life, in this world, rather than to take, trying to find it. Mahatma Gandhi said that the earth can provide everything for everyone. The earth can provide everyone's needs, but cannot provide for even a few people's greed. I had a friend who was an economics professor, and he told me that the basic problem of economics is there's limited resources and every person has unlimited desires. But if our desire is to serve rather than to take, then there's no economic problem. There's enough for everyone. So there is this need for spirituality, individually and collectively. And when we understand that need, we begin somewhere. We understand there's something beyond all this physical stuff, and I want to connect to that. And in regard to this book, The Journey Home, that's what happened to me. I was living in a middle-class family in upstate Illinois. And although my parents were struggling, they provided what we needed. They didn't provide all that much, but they provided what we needed. We were comfortable. We had 2 brothers. Of course, we were always fighting because that's the American way. But, I was happy just playing baseball in the empty lots, and playing football, and playing soccer, and watching television, and eating what I like to eat, and hanging out with my friends. But then something happened. I became a teenager. And suddenly, just playing in the empty lots wasn't enough. There were other things going on. And this was the 1960s, when there was a war, and there was a draft, and there was serious civil rights issues. And there just seemed to be so much hypocrisy on so many levels. Gandhi said, try to be the change you want to see in the world. Try to be the change that you want to see in others. I was beginning to realize I didn't have that much control over what was going on. I was just a little guy. But I did have some control over what I was going to do. And changing the world begins with that, what we could do to ourselves. And little by little, I began to believe that this change that I wanted to find was spiritual. But I didn't want it to be sectarian, because I saw that in the name of spirituality, instead of loving each other, people were hating each other. Instead of developing forgiveness, which is what I find in every religion I was studying, people were holding grudges for generations and generations. Instead of learning to love our neighbor as ourself and every living being as our neighbor, People were hating each other in the name of God. I was starting to realize that religion or spirituality or yoga is something very divine that's meant to heal, meant to transform. But as I was doing my traveling and searching, I found that if you have a humble heart, and if you respect other living beings, then the real message purifies you. But if you're too egoistic, then what happens is that message just becomes fuel for your ego. Religion can give absolute dimensions to your hatred and your arrogance. And you could justify anything on the basis of that. Hating and killing and war. The same thing that's meant to heal could exasperate the disease unless we have the right consciousness. So this is one of my first discoveries when I turned to the spiritual path, is how what I was looking for, I was seeing, was having opposite effects unless we really search for the essence. And myself and my friend, we left our homes for a summer vacation to Europe, searching for meaning and fulfillment in life. And it ended up that I hitchhiked from London to India, studying Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, various sects of Hinduism, and so many other things. I remember living with one yogi in the Himalayan mountains who really did have supernatural powers. I remember seeing him create ashes from his hand, create things from his hand. I saw him reading people's minds. And people came to worship him. And he told them that I'm not someone to worship. I just know how to do it. The only difference between you and me, I'm not God. I know how to do it and you don't. It's mind over matter. Through tuning in to the subtle energies with your mind, there's ways of manipulating the gross energy. He said, real spirituality is not in the exhibitions of supernatural powers, because evil people can get those powers too. Real spirituality is in realizing our eternal nature and living with character and compassion and love for God and others. That's real spirituality. That moved me. And then after he said this to everyone, he came up to me and asked, did you like my presentation? I said, I liked it a lot. And then he went like this and then put a Rudraksha bead in my hand. And I said, thank you. Can you give me that love you're talking about, though? That doesn't come so easy. I'll tell one little story, and then I'll end. I was living with one man He was an old, 85-year-old, I think, Swami, living on the bank of the Ganges River. And he was very, very kind to me. And he didn't speak English, but there was another man, even older than him, who would translate. His name was Narayan Prasad. And I remember how he taught me something that was very, very valuable. He said, to make spiritual progress, two things are very important. And I heard the same thing from my Guru Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada, years later. Two things are all important. One is our own endeavor, and the other is the grace of a power beyond ourselves. If we endeavor with the right intention, with the right purpose in our spiritual practices, if we endeavor with good character, then we attract the power of grace. And that grace can help us to overcome all obstacles, both physically, mentally, and spiritually. That grace is the highest power in all creation. And when we connect to that grace, it can inspire us, purify us, protect us, and empower us. In this book, The Journey Home, there were many, many obstacles that came in my life. And I applied those teachings, knowing it or not knowing it. I tried to apply those teachings. First, it just made sense, and then it became the very basis of my spiritual life. We have to try our best with right intentions. And if we do, and call out to a higher power than our own, then a magical grace takes over. And that makes life so incredibly exciting. I found that when I do things, what I can do and get it done, it's nice, but it's kind of boring. But when I try my best and I feel a power beyond my own, that power of grace manifesting through me, that's really exciting. That's deeply fulfilling. And that is something that we all have the potential for. This Ram Sevak Swami, I lived with him. He taught me many beautiful things. He treated me like a father to a son. And when it was time for me to move on, I asked his blessings, and he wanted to give me something. But what did he have to give? He was a Swami, living in a little stone hut. He looked around for a gift and picked up his walking stick, which was nothing but a broken branch from a tree. But he broke it just the right size. And he, even though he was such an exalted saint, he was very... Thank you. He was very shy because he was thinking, what is this American boy going to think about me giving him a stick? But for me, that stick was so precious. It was the offering of love of a great person. That stick, although if you tried to sell it in a market, you couldn't sell it for 5 cents. It was more valuable to me than all the fortunes of the Rockefellers in those days. This was 1971. And I remember when he gave me that stick, I remembered my mother. She taught me something that I didn't appreciate at the time, but as I grew older, it went so deep in my heart. Whatever gift she received, whether it was a pearl necklace or a simple flower, whether it was a beautiful original painting or whether it was a drawing that I did in school, she would always say the same thing with tears in her eyes. It's the thought that counts. It's not the thing. It's the thought that counts. What gives us satisfaction is the exchange of love. Krishna says in Gita, Patram Pushpam Palam Toyam, whatever you give, if it's offered with love, Krishna's pleased to receive it. My mother taught me that lesson. It's the love that satisfies us, not the thing. He offered that stick with so much affection that it was priceless. Then he said to me that the stick of a holy person's blessings can protect you from the most dangerous fear. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I really liked the stick. And I was walking with that stick. It was my walking stick. And I just felt so important to have that old branch. I had to go to Nepal. So I went to the border of India and Nepal. The town was called Raxaul. And I crossed over. And I didn't have any money in those days. I was a hitchhiker. And when you're in the East, you have to really be creative about how you hitchhike, because there wasn't that many cars on the road. So I got a ride on the back of a truck. It was a lorry truck. Just had this bed in the back with like gates on the sides of it, and it had hundreds and hundreds of pounds of grain sacks, big grain sacks, rice sacks and wheat sacks and other kinds of sacks. And they were stacked so high. If you go to India, you'll see how they do this. Those grain sacks were so high that they were above the cab where the driver's in. And it was above the gates that were holding it into the sides. And on top of the grain sacks, which were way, way up above, on the very top of this truck, were about 5 old farm ladies with these ripped up shawls over their heads, 3 farmers with turbans, about 6 goats, about 10 chickens, a couple lambs, and me. Now, to get to Kathmandu, you're going up these huge Himalayan mountains like this. And it really wasn't safe. There was no question of safety belts. The grain sacks were going like this, and the chickens were going, and the sheep were bleeding, and the bleating. It was very exciting. And it was the monsoon season. I remember it started pouring rain on us. There was nothing on top of us except the sky. And all these old farmers that were my traveling companions, they were just totally undisturbed. It was just like a daily event for them. But I must say this. It was the most incredible panoramic view of the Himalayas that we got from that truck top. We drove for hours and hours all day long, and finally it was the middle of the night, probably around midnight hour, when the truck stopped and dropped me off in the outskirts of Kathmandu in this small village. There was hardly anything around, just a row of some shabby little houses. And there was no humans on the street. And I heard the howling of a dog. And it reminded me of what I was warned by other wandering hermits. In the East, one of the most dangerous things you can encounter is a pack of wild dogs. Because when they're hungry, you're their food. They like humans a lot. Especially if you're alone. So one dog ran up to me and cocked his head in the air and howled. Ow! And a few seconds later, I heard all these other dogs barking and coming closer and closer. Soon I was surrounded by a pack of wild dogs. There was this row of houses behind me, and I put my back against it so they couldn't surround me completely. What I noticed is some of them had foam pouring out of their mouth. I realized they had rabies, and they were really hungry. They were skinny. Most of them, only about half their bodies had hair. The other was bare. Some of them had all kinds of gashes and scars all over their bodies. But their eyes were so ferocious. And even though they didn't have much hair, one thing I noticed is they all had full sets of teeth. They were showing me their teeth. And one of them leaped toward me. And I prayed to God, what am I going to do? And I went to put my hands together like this, and I realized I had a stick. I took that stick. I was trying to be ahimsa, nonviolence, but this was an exceptional case. I just, with all my might, and I had skinny arms then, even probably about like I have now. I whacked the dog in the nose, and he fell back and growled louder. And then another jumped at me, and I whacked him down. And then another jumped at me and whacked him down. It wasn't really hurting them. They were so hungry and so passionate to eat me. One man's food is another man's poison, they say. They were so passionate to eat. It didn't matter how much I hit them. They just got more angry. They were jumping and jumping, and I was whacking and whacking. I was really frantic. I understood if I miss one, I'm finished. If one gets on me, they'll all converge, rip me apart. Time was passing, and I was really, really getting tired. I remember thinking how beneficial it was that I played Little League when I was a little boy. Little League baseball, because I was thinking I didn't know that my training in Little League baseball would equip me to save my life. But I was swinging and I was very accurate. I was getting strike. I was getting hits each time. They were getting hungrier and they could see I was getting tired. Total exhaustion. They were coming closer and closer and jumping and I'm hitting. And I realized they were getting stronger and I was getting weaker. There was 6 or 7 of them. And all that time I didn't think about the possibility of one of the doors behind me being open. But when I realized that I had practically no more strength to defend myself, I started thinking, what else could I do? There was a door behind me. If it was open, I might get in. If it was locked, I'm dead. I can't carry on like this. So I turned around real fast, opened the door, and it opened, and I slammed it shut. But made the dogs really mad. They were jumping against the door and howling and screaming and barking. And I was in this house. I didn't know what it was. It was absolutely pitch dark. But I made quite a stir, slapping their door. And I saw a match lit. And it illuminated a lantern. They held the lantern up, and I saw a family, Nepalese family, laying on the floor. And they saw me and started yelling louder than the dogs. The man of the house picked up a sword and charged at me. I wasn't ready to run outside. I got on my knees like this and just looked up at him, and he ran toward me. He was angry as anything. I invaded his privacy. He thought I was a criminal or a robber or a killer, and he held the sword above my head and started screaming in the Nepalese language. And I didn't understand a word he said, and I couldn't talk to him. I just looked in his eyes, and he ordered me to get out. But when he heard the dogs jumping against his door, he realized if I were to leave, I was to die. I looked in his eyes, didn't speak his language, but I was praying that he would understand my desperation, pleading through my glance. He sized me up, what my intentions were. Then he put down his sword and said something to his wife and children. And a few seconds later, they gave me a cup of hot milk and some bananas. So I was very happy. And then they started honoring me. It was like an unexpected holy man, because I was dressed like a holy man in those days with long matted hair. And they accepted me as an uninvited holy man coming to bless their family. And they fed me nice bananas and nice milk. And I lay down to go to sleep. The whole night long, the dogs were jumping against that door, barking, trying to get at me somehow or other. And I remember thinking at that time, a lesson that I had read in Bhagavad Gita, that each person has a divine and a demoniac nature within us. And I also heard a Native American Indian analogy of the same principle, that within every human heart there are two dogs, a good dog and a bad dog. The good dog represents humility. The bad dog, arrogance. The good dog, selflessness. The bad dog, selfishness. Love, hate, greed. Generosity, greed. Contentment, agitation. And these two dogs, it's like they're competing with each other. Have any of you ever had this experience before? Within the mind? And the one that is strongest is the one that we feed. And we feed them by the choices we make, moment to moment. Sometimes that bad dog is howling. Like that. And the good dog is like, just crying out for some food. So the choices we make in our life is what determines whether our divine nature conquers over our exploitative nature or vice versa. And really the spiritual path, our spiritual practices, the company that we keep, is how we feed that good dog, feed that virtuous, divine nature of ours. That's our true self. So that it can overpower our lower nature. I was remembering that beautiful lesson. And having encountered all of these dogs, these bad dogs, I remember thinking, it's a little glimpse of what I have to deal with inside my own heart. And then I was thinking how prophetic Radhanath Swami was when he gave me that stick. His words, the stick of the blessings of a holy man can save one from the greatest dangers. And by the wisdom and the grace we receive from the holy people, it gives us the stick by which we can overcome the obstacles on our path. In our path of bhakti, we have a meditation where we tune in to the divinity within us through mantra. The man means the mind, tra means to liberate or free. It's a sound vibration. Just like on the radio, there are different frequencies that tune into different stations. Within the world, there's a lot of energies going on. A mantra tunes us in to that divine energy, to grace, within our own heart and within everything that exists. This kirtan is the chanting of mantras. It's beautiful music, but it's a music that tunes us into the frequency of the divinity within ourselves and the universe. And sometimes we softly chant these mantras. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare is one mantra that we focus on because it's considered the Maha Mantra. It includes all other mantras. and different spiritual traditions chant different mantras or different divine sounds of God's names. This is the purpose, to reconnect us to our original essence and to the love of God that is within us, and to be an instrument of that love in whatever we do. Whether we're business people or engineers or farmers or yoga teachers or mothers or fathers or swamis. Whatever we do, if we do it to express the divine compassion of our very self, not only can we find the liberation and the love that we've always been seeking, but we can be an instrument to inspire others to do the same. I thank you very much. Would anyone like to speak anything or ask any questions? Yes.
When in the book I was reading, you came across the it just came in your heart, or did you hear other people saying you while you were meditating?
I heard it on the rock. Whether I heard it before, I may have, I'm not really sure, but I heard it in the song of the river. In the Bible it is said, "Seek and ye shall find." Thank you so much for being with us. And that's a universal principle. If we're really seeking spiritual wisdom and spiritual grace, then it's revealed. It could be revealed in ways that are unbelievable. Could be in the words of an enemy. Could be in the song of a bird. Could be in the beauty of a sunrise. Could be in the song of the river. God could reveal grace to us in so many ways if we open our hearts to receive it. Yes, sir.
What's the best way to stop mind chatter during meditation?
Mind chatter during meditation. Krishna tells in Gita a beautiful verse. Yato yato nischalati manas chanchalamascharam. The mind is called chanchalam, which means always moving around. And Krishna says, from wherever and whenever the mind wanders due to its flickering and unsteady nature, one just brings it back. The mind is like a restless, mischievous little child. Yes? I remember one parent told me this, that they tried to child-proof a room. So that the child would be safe. Because the child is just starting to walk, right? Just starting to walk and really enthusiastic and wild. And the parents had to do stuff. So they wanted to have a room where the child just wouldn't hurt himself. It was a little boy. Boys are especially very wild. So So they just put all cushions down, and they took all sharp things and pointed things and jagged things out of the room. So it was just a room with all nice soft toys and pillows. And they put the child in, and the mother went to do her cooking or whatever, and she just wanted to check. About 5 minutes later, she came in the room, and she saw the little child opened a drawer and found a razor blade. She was horrified. What is this? The one thing that I didn't even know existed. Immediately, he just zeroed in on that. So what did the mother do? She took the razor blade out of the child's hand and, made sure there was no other razor blades in the drawers that she forgot to see. And so the mind is like that child. And the intelligence is meant to be like the mother. Yes? The mother brings the child back into a safe place. And inevitably, the mother knows that the child's going to run to an unsafe place, but she keeps bringing him back to a safe place. So wherever and whenever the mind wanders, as Bhagavad Gita says, yato nischalati manas chanchalam ashtaram, manas chanchalam, the flickering mind, wherever it runs to, with our intelligence, we bring it back to our focus. We bring it back to the mantra. It can be done in a very graceful way. We don't have to get mad at the mind. Why should the mother get mad at the child? The child's just doing his thing. But she has to do her thing. His thing is to get in trouble, and her thing is to protect him. So just understand that, right? So when the mind wanders, we shouldn't get discouraged. We shouldn't get all, why is my mind like... No, okay, the mind, the intelligence, okay, you're doing, it's expected, come back. Mind wanders, we bring it back to the mantra, bring it back to the mantra. As soon as we're aware that it's off. And in this way, just keep bringing back, keep focusing. And eventually the mantra, or our object of meditation, it purifies the mind. So gradually, little by little, the mind's tendency to run off gets less and less. Why? The Gita says, param dristva nivartate. Because when the mother gives the child some really nice favorite candy, then the child doesn't run around so much. Because he likes this better than razor blades. So when we gradually, by just bringing the mind back to that divinity in the form of the mantra, gradually the mind starts to taste the sweetness of that mantra and starts to taste the sweetness of God and thoughts of love and thoughts of devotion. And as we develop that higher taste, the mind's tendency to run all over looking for other things gets less and less and less. And samadhi, the perfection of yoga, is when the mind is so absorbed in that higher experience. Its inclination for anything else doesn't exist anymore. Does that answer your question? So just try to teach your intelligence to be a good, caring mother. And don't get mad at the mind. Just protect him. Yes.
Could you say a bit more about ahimsa? As in, I liked your story about the dogs, and it reminded me of Arjuna and Krishna, when Arjuna says, "Look, there are hunters going out there and to war and killing my uncles, my cousins." Could you just sort of say a bit more about that?
Ahimsa is a very, very deep concept. Ahimsa, in its crudest state, means not to cause pain or kill another person. It means nonviolence. But true ahimsa is about the body, the mind, and the soul. To insult somebody is violence to the mind. To disrespect someone is violence to that person's emotions. To neglect someone is causing pain to somebody. What to speak of physical. So real ahimsa is a humble attitude of genuine respect and concern for the well-being of others. In Sanskrit, there's a beautiful phrase, paradukkaduki, which means real ahimsa is when another person's happiness is your happiness, and another person's suffering is your suffering. And ahimsa is true and satisfying to the heart to the extent it's real, it's honest, and it's inclusive. Not just to our own family members. Of course, charity begins at home. Sometimes that's the hardest thing. But it includes our community. It includes, ahimsa becomes greater as it becomes more inclusive to all humanity. And more inclusive, we're all living beings. Where we really try honestly to minimize the pain that we cause other people, physically or emotionally or spiritually. Some pain has to be there, just for survival, but to minimize it as far as possible. And that's why traditionally, in the yoga community, vegetarianism is a very important thing. Now, from an environmental, ecological perspective, it's a wiser type of diet. From a aesthetic perspective also, from a health perspective also. But most of all, it's based on this principle of ahimsa, respecting and honoring the feelings and the life of other beings, and trying to give them happiness rather than suffering, and to make choices accordingly. Now, sometimes what appears to be violence is more ahimsa than to not be violent. It's like there was one proponent of ahimsa who said, I will never ever lift my hand to cause anyone pain in any way. And a newspaper reporter asked him, what if someone came to violate the chastity, in other words, to rape your daughter, and the only way you can stop it is through physically stopping that person? Would you do it? The person said no. And the journalist said, that is violence. To stand by and not do anything when somebody else is being exploited is another type of, it's a higher violence than taking proper action. Of course, this has to be done with compassion, and this has to be done with wisdom. In Bhagavad Gita, that war was based on ahimsa, in the sense that it had to be fought for the protection of the human race, without selfish, egoistic motives. I hope that answers your question. Yes.
Just like something that some amount of suffering is necessary for surviving. I thought Satchidananda means there is no suffering, it's pure bliss. An enlightened person sees no suffering.
An enlightened person is in bliss, but it doesn't mean an enlightened person doesn't see the sufferings of others. An enlightened person does see the sufferings of others and wants to help. That's compassion, that's love. Now, when you pick some fruit from a tree, or when that may cause a little pain to the tree, but you have to eat. But that's not the same as slaughtering an animal. The quantity of pain is something very, very different.
Now we're putting suffering on a continuum. I thought it was a state where there's no suffering because of enlightenment. There is suffering, like Buddha said, the world is suffering.
There is suffering. We'll never get enlightenment unless we recognize suffering. That was the basic principle of Buddha and every great teacher. You have to understand the problem in order to solve it. Love means to respect and to honor the rights of others, and not to if a person's sick and a doctor feels that this child needs an injection, right, to heal the sickness, there's some suffering in giving the injection. But if it's going to save the child's life, that's ahimsa. Yes? So suffering may be there. But to be compassionate, to actually really be a well-wisher, and to minimize violence as far as possible and suffering, that's true humanitarianism. That's true spirituality also. Is there any other question? Yes, please.
What is the state of the mind, the body, and the soul while on earth? Because, I'm just curious if the mind is trying, or the soul is trying to transcend all earthly things, then, I'm assuming that there's maybe it's harmoniously united, or that's kind of what one is trying to attempt to do, but I was curious.
What is your name? Beautiful question, Michelle. The body is like a vehicle. It's like some people are, the body is a vehicle. The mind is like a subtle form of a vehicle. There's an analogy that the body is like a chariot, and the five senses are like the five horses that are pulling the chariot. And the reins, the straps that are meant to control the horses, is the mind. And the intelligence is the chariot driver that's supposed to be controlling the mind, and through the mind, the senses. And the true self, the Atma, is the passenger. Now, harmony means when the intelligence is driving the chariot according to where the passenger wants it to go. Otherwise, what happens is where the senses want to go, that's where the chariot goes. That's what commonly happens in this world. But we should actually, yoga means to harmonize the senses, the body, the mind, and the intelligence with the true wish, the true will and benefit of the soul, the Atma. So the body is like a vehicle. We're temporarily in it. Death means we go out of this vehicle. At the time of death, all the components of the body are there, the hands and the eyes and the heart and the brain, but nothing's working because there's no one home. Immediately after death, the person may look exactly the same, but we cry because we know the person's gone. So it's obvious at that moment that the person we loved is different than the body. The person was in the body. And the body's sacred because it's through this body that the person can express him or herself. And it's through this body that we can relate to that spiritual being. So death is an emotional thing, even for spiritual people. Spiritual people often cry when they lose a loved one, but it's not in ignorance. They know that that person has not ceased to exist. That person has just moved on to another vehicle. But this particular vehicle was the vehicle that I could so wonderfully relate to, and that's gone. So we're happy for the person, but there can be a sadness that interaction that we had is no longer. That's a sadness in knowledge. And that sadness could be an expression of love and knowledge rather than love and ignorance. So this body is a temporary vehicle, and the vehicle should take us where we want it to go. Yes? So we have to know where we want to go. And then the vehicle is a very, very valuable thing. Today I drove here to the Arlington Yoga Studio in what kind of car you have?
Sienna.
It's a Toyota Sienna. So we drove in this Toyota Sienna. Now, I'm not a Toyota Sienna. But it took me to the place I wanted to go, to be with Michelle and Marinda and all the rest of you, and it's beautiful. So it was in harmony with what was good for me and how I can serve you. So that's the type of harmony that yoga brings about, that this body and this mind, which are temporary, are utilized for a sacred purpose. And we should take care of the body and mind. Part of Hatha Yoga is to have a healthy, flexible body, which is very good, especially when the real purpose of yoga is there, that healthy, nice body that we have is effectively and efficiently serving the will of God, the will of the soul. My friend Gary, who I began my journey with, at one point I hadn't seen him in 18 years. Did any of you get to that part of the book yet? I hadn't seen him in 18 years. There was no communication. Because we were in a cave together in the Himalayas, and then I had to leave because my visa was expiring, and I don't know what happened to him, and I had no idea where to reach him. His family moved by the time I came back, and my family moved. There was no way. And somehow or other we met. And when we met, I didn't know what to do. When he last saw me, I had long matted hair and I was a little skinny sadhu living in a cave in the Himalayas. And he had long hair and big beard, and he was a little skinny guy just wandering around looking for something spiritual. And this time I had a shaved head and I had saffron robes and I was a Swami. So he didn't recognize me. And he had a gigantic body which was like a mountain of muscles, thick neck, giant arms, giant chest, and short hair, and clean shaven. I became a Swami, and he became a lawyer. His model was Mahatma Gandhi. After 7 years on the road in third world countries, he wanted to be like Gandhi, and Gandhi was a lawyer, so he went to Chico State University and then Pepperdine College and got his law degree and started practicing law. And after a few years, came to the conclusion, this is nothing like Gandhi's life. Being a lawyer in America is a whole different mood. But he was so sick from all his traveling, so while he was in college, he started doing physical fitness, and he ended up a bodybuilding champion. So somebody made him an offer to be a physical trainer in the Malibu gym. And he decided that's more like Gandhi than being a lawyer. Or whatever his reasoning. But he was happy. He was definitely happy doing that. It's not that he couldn't be a lawyer, but that was his choice in life. So when we saw each other, I remember we looked at each other like, what do we have in common? And we spoke, and we started realizing we still had, deep down inside, we had all the same things in common we did when we were traveling together. We were just in very different occupations, different lifestyles. And Gary asked me a question. How is it possible that we could still be friends? We have nothing in common. He said, my whole life is to convince people that if they have a strong, healthy body, that they're going to be happy. And your life is to convince people that they're not their body. So I told him yoga is harmonizing. That the body is a temple of God, because God is within the heart. The soul is part of God, and the Paramatma, the Lord, is seated within the heart of every living being. So the body is a temple. So you teach people how to have very good, strong, healthy, clean temples, and I'll try to teach them what to do inside the temple. And we'll be a team. And he said, yes, we're a team. And since that day, we're a team. Closer than ever before even. So yes, this body is sacred. It's temporary, but it's sacred. And if it's used for a sacred purpose, then we could use it for its real potential. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Yes.
I want to ask, in Christianity, people pray for other people when they're sick, and we did a thing about devoting our practice that day to somebody, and we all assume that if somebody's sick, maybe they want to be healed, but that's not necessarily the case. Where do you draw the line before you're invading maybe their spiritual growth? Maybe they need to go through this, and we're projecting some energy to them that maybe they shouldn't get. Are we creating karma for ourselves? Where do you see that? Where you want to do good for a person, but how do you do that without invading their spiritual growth where they're supposed to be?
Very thoughtful question, thank you. There's different ways of praying, different levels of prayer. And perhaps in our prayer, we can pray that whatever is best for this person, please let it be. If it's best for this person to get cured, pray that this person could be cured. If it's best for this person to be cured indirectly by going through certain things, then let that be. We don't really know necessarily what a person's karma is and all of that stuff. But we can truly be a well-wisher and be compassionate and pray to God, pray to the divine, that please bless this person. Please bless this person with overall good health, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, in the way according to your wisdom. And we're showing our prayers, and prayers are very powerful. Prayers really do work. They invoke a divine power beyond our own. So let our prayers be for the overall welfare and benefit of that person. Does that answer your question? Yes.
You were saying earlier, part of compassion is, someone else's suffering is my suffering, someone else's happiness is my happiness. When you're trying to be compassionate, taking in so much, when you're spending time with somebody who's in so much pain, or if your job is to spend time with people who are in so much pain, how do you keep that pain from hurting you?
Your students have such heartfelt, excellent questions. Could I become a student here also? Thank you for this question. To relieve a person's suffering, we have to be equipped to fill that person with positive energy. And if we're losing our positive energy by absorbing all their negativity, then we really can't help anyone. That's not real compassion. Real compassion is practical. It's not just theoretical. It's actually to really be the best we can to help a person. So sadhana, or spiritual practice, is meant to give us spiritual strength, positive spiritual strength. Whether it's prayer or chanting mantra or meditation or puja, it's to nourish us with divine power, with grace. And the more we nourish ourselves with that, the more, when we're with a suffering person, rather than just taking their suffering, we're giving them something very positive. We may have to hear their suffering and deal with their suffering, but in the process, we have something so positive within ourselves that we can be contributing rather than just being affected. We sit and we chant this Maha Mantra for a couple hours every day, some of us. And one of the reasons is to be filled with so much of this spiritual grace and this spiritual positivity that when we go out into the world, rather than just being affected by things, we could actually be effective to make positive differences, to serve others. It's like if you see starving people, if you want to help them, you have to have food. And that might mean that you have to, work and get some food so that you can help them. So our sadhana is to do some, internal work to get the nourishment and the food that we can give others to alleviate their hunger. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Yes. How long should we continue, Marinda?
How about a couple more questions? I know she in particular has
Okay, please.
It just seems to me the last 4 or 5 questions are all seem to be cycling back to this gentleman's issue of ahimsa. And that is something that I struggle with. I would say it keeps me up every night. But there are things that are part of our daily routine where we have to make choices. All of that. And I have to say, I just had a chance to read the very beginning of your book, and the story in the prologue really disturbed me that you were handled so violently when you tried to go to this holy place. And that your entry eventually had to be done by deception, because in order for you to get in there, you had to make yourself look like you belonged. And so that was kind of disturbing to me as I was listening to the beginning of your talk. But fairly early on, you said the important thing to you was that this pursuit be non-sectarian. And because it doesn't matter what one person, the word that one person uses and another person uses, or if in Christianity we pray for somebody, but what if that's intruding on their spiritual practice, if it's done in a sacred and blessed and humble way, it shouldn't intrude. The thing about harming is, and I understand your struggle, because I accidentally caused the death of a squirrel the other day, and I had to pull over the side of the road because it upset me so much. Because it was something almost didn't have a choice. I mean, there was momentum, and then there was stopping, and there was nothing to be done. And so, had I been walking, it wouldn't have happened. I could have made another choice. So those are little things that I don't like that happen in my life, but I don't know what I can do about them. In the situation that he's talking about, though, and you brought this up, there are moments where you have to choose. And if you are on a path of enlightenment, asking for wisdom for the right choice, would you say that puts you still in an action on a path of ahimsa?
I'm not sure if I understand exactly what the question is.
Well, if you're given a choice between 2 moments of violence, and you're trying to practice ahimsa, to do nothing, in the example that you gave, would cause a greater harm. So how do you resolve that?
How do you make these choices? There are different ways of making choices. Of course, as we develop our compassion and our wisdom, we naturally are tuned in to make higher choices. According to our own enlightenment, we can make more enlightened choices. And that's part of why we take to spiritual practice, because we become tuned into a higher energy in which we can make more enlightened choices. And when we're not on that level yet, we could inquire from people who we believe are on that level and consult them about making choices. And if it's a situation where we really can't consult people because it's something I have to decide right now, and I'm not very enlightened, then we can apply the principles with sincerity and honesty, and make the choice that we feel has the greatest integrity and character. And ultimately, God sees our sincerity. Even if we don't make the best choice, if we do it with a sincere spirit of goodness, then we will grow through the experience. Thank you. One more question? Yes.
I find that the most difficult obstacle for myself in sadhana, spiritual practice, is shame. fear and shame and just this weight of sort of falling into the same patterns over and over, both spiritually and psychologically, and just not seeming to be able to break out of certain things. I mean, I guess it goes back to the mind running about. I don't know. So how does one contend with that? I don't know if that makes it. The question makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. One of our very great saints, Rupa Goswami, he wrote that we should accept what is favorable for devotion and reject what is unfavorable for devotion. Things like guilt and shame are human emotions. They shouldn't beat us down. They should lift us up. We should learn to utilize these types of human emotions to make progress. So if we make a mistake and we're guilty and we're just beating ourselves up and we become depressed and we become miserable, who are we going to help in that state? Neither ourselves or anyone else. So if we make a mistake, even the shame or guilt that may be there, it should be seen as something that can be utilized in a very positive way to enliven us to make the right choice next time, rather than just beating ourselves up for the bad choice we made in the past. It should enlighten us. I understand now it was the wrong thing and I'm suffering for it or whatever. So rather than getting depressed, we should become inspired. I have to do the right thing now with more determination. We should be dynamic, not depressed. We have to forgive ourselves. Just as we meant to forgive other people, we also have to forgive ourselves and strive for improvement in doing so. Does that answer your question? I think we should end now. It's really beautiful to be with all of you. So grateful. Mirinda, I'm so grateful to you for inviting me. Thank you. Having me.